You know, I was raised in a community where we were self-sufficient to some extent because we lived off the land. We may not have a lot of money in the bank, but we always had food on the table and a roof over our head. And I think to us those are the three basic things you need. You need housing, you need clothing, you need and food. Those are three things I think are the very basic things that as human beings that we need across Canada. To me, my question to you is, this the whole equation of working together. Do you see that happening? I don't know how you're going to reach those people that live on those reserves that are so isolated that they do not have many jobs in those communities. How is that going to change for them? How are we going to work together so that we can all see this change happening to everyone equally across the table? And because one of the things I constantly argue with all the time is, or myself anyways, is that we always seem to be pouring money into these countries overseas, constantly, millions and millions of dollars, and yet we don't take care of our backyard. And I think that's really important to keep that in mind, that we need to start thinking about how do we help our own Canadians, people across Canada, no matter who they are.
Thank you for that. I did make reference to our First Nations brothers and sisters in terms of their overpopulation of prisons through no fault of their heritage, but because of the circumstances they are in. And one of the reasons that I believe very, very clearly that we have to do this on a local, territorial, or province-wide basis, because the devil is in the detail, and the devil is in how it's going to be designed. Who have to be around the table for that have to include our First Nations. They have to be around that table in that design process. And there are complexities. There's nothing I can say to anybody from this territory, First Nations or otherwise, about the complexities around land claim agreements that have been reached after endless negotiation, and where it's clear that successive federal governments have actually not kept up their end of the deal. And because some of those agreements were reached through what a senior economist used to refer to as the binding glue of ambiguity, the clarity of what all those agreements mean isn't quite as precise as the framers might have felt when, in good faith, they counseled with the elders and others and signed on. But that does not, in my view, stand in the way of a common opportunity to do a basic income floor. That is a rationale for it being designed by people from the territory and the First Nations together so that everybody understands how it will work. We have, and I mentioned INAC in my formal comments a couple of times, we have, as you yourself have said, large amounts of money being spent. And we have a challenge in terms of, if I'm a taxpayer in Kingston and I'm upset with my local government, I get to vote for them because I get to send them tax. In some cases across Canada, money is sent to band councils, not to the people who they serve, and that changes the dynamic in that relationship about what spending priorities should be, either on a reserve or elsewhere. And that also has to be taken into account so that individual members of First Nations as human beings are not left out of the process in some fashion. And of course, band leadership have to be part of that mix. So I don't suggest for a moment it's easy, but I think if it is about, we now have an opportunity to do something very, very special, and we want everybody in at the beginning, then I think we have a chance to show the rest of the world, quite frankly, what this part of the world could do on that question. I will push back with a tiny bit of affection on the foreign aid issue and just say this. The same rules that we see in our own communities. There is more violence, more dysfunction, more unhappiness where there's abject poverty. Actually applies to the world we share with all of God's creations. And if you look at the places where the violence is the most intense, and if you look at how much billions are being spent on arms and military, and if you ask what would happen if you just invested half as much, and Audrey's been to many of those places, God bless her, trying to build democracy. It is easier in places where there is some basic income support for people, where they have a way of making a living, than it is in areas of abject poverty. And because in the smaller world in which we all live, what goes on far away can end up being an issue on our own streets very quickly these days, I think we have to try to find a way to do both. We're not doing enough at home, but it's not about spending more, I argue. It's about spending what we're spending more effectively, with more humanity and more real impact in people's lives. And I would like to think that a country that has the third or second highest standard of living in the world could realize two things. A, for our First Nations, many are living in third world circumstances with disease rates, diabetes, death, alcoholism that are amongst the worst in the civilized world. So we have a primary duty there. And secondly, we can't turn our backs on the rest of the world because that's not who we are, what Canadians have always believed in. And I kind of think we have the ability to do both. And I think your advice, that we've got to find a way to do this together, is perhaps the most important advice all morning. Thank you.
Or is there a last question? We're out of time for this part of the program, but is there a last question that someone absolutely must ask that is so volcanic that it just can't be repressed? Is there anything out there? No? I would just like to say, and I don't ask the Senator or any of the panelists to respond to this, but I hope that the corollary of the Senator's thesis, and I don't say this simply because he introduced the idea of reducing the deputy's salary to $1, but I hope that the corollary isn't that if we spend our money a bit better and we take care of the money side, we've eradicated poverty and social inclusion will take care of itself. There's something profoundly different between establishing financial benchmarks for people, which is important in its own dimension, and reaching the people that the last speaker spoke to. We have people dying on our streets as recently as 2 nights ago, alone and in despair. We have to have something more to say to those people than, it's okay, we're going to make sure that you're fed and clothed. We need to have that conversation, and I'm not sure that I fully understand it yet. But with that, and sorry, I know you're itching to jump at that, but we're going to take a 15-minute break, which I know most of us desperately need, and we'll resume with the next panel. But before I do that, I just express my thanks to the Senator, who of course is going to be with us today, our panelists, especially Kate, who was a kind of a last-minute but valuable addition. And in that respect, I've got a small token of our appreciation for the Senator with our thanks. Thank you very much. And for the panelists, I'm going to give it to them later in the interest of time, but I'd like you to join me in a round of applause for their contribution. Thank you. Thank you all.